There is a pattern buried inside the ruins of the ancient world that almost no one talks about. Every few centuries, a new superpower rises. It burns everything that came before, and the old world vanishes forever. That is what happened to the Babylonians, the Hittites, the Assyrians, once so fearsome that entire kingdoms paid tribute just to avoid their attention. All of them gone, dissolved into dust and museum labels. But then there is this one place, a plateau at the crossroads of every major invasion route in history. A land conquered by Greeks, Arabs, Mongols, and Turks. A land that by every historical rule should have been erased and forgotten 1,000 years ago. Instead, it swallowed its conquerors whole. Not once. Not twice. Over and over across 5,000 years. The same civilization. Still standing, still speaking its own language, still called by the same name it chose before Rome was even a village. This is the real history of Iran. And if you think you already know it, you probably don't. Most people were taught that civilization began in two places, Mesopotamia and Egypt, Sumer, Babylon, the Nile. That story is incomplete. On the Iranian plateau, archaeologists have found traces of urban life going back 6,000 to 7,000 years. City layouts, irrigation systems, and trade networks that predate most of what we casually call the ancient world. A state called Elam rose in the southwest and grew so powerful it was shaping regional geopolitics while most of Europe was still foraging in forests. And here is the detail that almost never makes it into textbooks. The very first international treaty in recorded human history, the first time two nations negotiated terms and put them in writing, was signed here. Between the Elamites and an Akkadian king in the 23rd century before Christ. Not Greece, not Rome, Iran. The idea of nations negotiating, instead of simply annihilating each other, was born on this plateau. The Thai, people we now call Iranians, arrived between the 20th and 15th centuries before Christ. Nomadic tribes from the Central Asian steppes, speaking a language ancestral to Greek, Latin, and the languages spoken across Europe today. When they merged with the older Elamite world, they named themselves Arya, meaning noble, and called their new homeland the land of the noble ones. 4,000 years later, slightly compressed, that word is still the country's name. Iran is not a modern political label. It is one of the oldest self-chosen names in human history. But a name alone does not explain survival. Something else was being built here, something that would quietly reshape the spiritual life of half the planet. Around 1500 before Christ, a prophet named Zarathustra taught something no one had said before. Every religion in the ancient world saw time as a circle. Seasons turned. Empires rose and fell. History had no destination. Zarathustra said that is wrong. Time moves in a line. The universe has a beginning, a direction, and an end. Reality itself is a war, truth and order against deception and destruction. And every human being and every single choice they make is a soldier in that war. This gave a scattered people a shared purpose and a reason to hold on even when everything around them was burning, and the idea spread far beyond Iran when Persia conquered Babylon in the 6th century before Christ. They freed the Jewish people from captivity. Jewish and Zoroastrian thinkers lived side by side for 2 centuries. Linear time, a final judgment, the resurrection of the dead, the ultimate victory of good. All of this moved from Persian theology into Jewish thought, and from there into Christianity and Islam. The spiritual coordinates inside which 3 billion people still live today carry Persian fingerprints that almost nobody knows about. By 550 before Christ, a king named Cyrus united the Medes and the Persians and built something the world had never seen, an empire based on tolerance. When Cyrus conquered Babylon, he did not burn the temples or enslave the population. He issued a declaration, now called the Cyrus Cylinder, stating that every conquered people had the right to keep their language, religion, and customs. Some scholars consider it the oldest human rights document ever written. Within 2 generations, the Achaemenid Empire stretched from Egypt to India. Roughly 50 million people, half of all humans alive at the time, lived under Persian rule. Connected by standardized currency, a national postal system, and roads so well built the Romans would later reconstruct them and take the credit. Then in 330 before Christ, Alexander burned Persepolis to the ground and the Greeks declared Persia finished. They were not watching a death. They were watching the beginning of Persia's most effective counterattack. Alexander himself almost immediately began wearing Persian clothes and holding Persian court ceremonies. His own generals accused him of losing his mind. He was not losing his mind. He was being digested. When his empire collapsed, his Greek successors tried to rule Iran as a Greek state. Iranian culture quietly dismantled everything they built. Within a century, a dynasty called the Parthians expelled the Greeks entirely, restored Persian language and statecraft, and then held off Rome, the most powerful military force on earth, for 5 centuries. Rome never crossed the Iranian plateau. Not once. In 651 AD, Arab armies destroyed the last Persian dynasty. Zoroastrianism, which had shaped Iranian identity for over 1,000 years, began to fade. For any other civilization, that would have been the end. But Iranian scholars and administrators quietly took over the intellectual machinery of the entire Islamic world. The greatest works of the Islamic Golden Age, in medicine, astronomy, mathematics, literature, were produced overwhelmingly by Iranians, written in Persian, built on Persian foundations. The conquerors were being run by the people they had conquered. Then came something worse than anything before. In 1220, the Mongols arrived. They did not conquer cities. They erased them. Ancient irrigation systems built over millennia were destroyed in weeks. Iran lost between half and 2/3 of its entire population. By every measurement, this was civilizational death, except that within 50 years, the Mongol rulers had converted to Islam, made Persian the state language, and were funding the most exquisite Persian art and poetry the world had ever seen. Men whose grandfathers had built towers of skulls were sitting in blue-domed mosques reading Persian verse. Tamerlane repeated the pattern a century later. Total destruction followed within 2 generations by a Persian cultural renaissance at his descendants' courts. The cycle never broke. In 1501, Shah Ismail reunited Iran and declared Shia Islam, not the Sunni Islam of the Ottoman Empire, the official religion of the state. It looked like a religious choice. It was a civilizational boundary marker. Iran was drawing a circle around itself again. We are distinct. We are not you. We will not be absorbed. By the 19th century, that instinct was fighting against Russian and British empires, carving the country into spheres of influence, extracting its oil, and reducing a 5,000-year civilization to a chessboard. And then in 1935, a single act cut through all of it. Reza Shah Pahlavi sent a directive to every government on earth: stop calling this country Persia. That name came from the Greeks mispronouncing a single province. In the West, it had come to mean fairy tales and picturesque ruins. A decorative image, not a sovereign nation. The country's name is Iran. It has always been Iran. Call it by its name. Behind those 4 words was everything 5,000 years of survival had built toward. We are not a relic you romanticize from a distance. We are a nation. Deal with us as one. In 1979, decades of foreign interference exploded in the Islamic Revolution. The monarchy fell. A theocratic republic took its place. The relationship with the West broke in ways that have never fully healed. Today, the word Iran arrives in most minds loaded with sanctions, tension, and geopolitical anxiety. But the word Persia, the old colonial nickname, has quietly become something beautiful, romantic, mythological. It sells perfume and fills travel magazines. Same land. 2 names, 2 completely different worlds in people's imaginations. That gap is not an accident. It is the battlefield, a quiet war over memory, over narrative, over who gets to tell the story of one of the oldest unbroken civilizations on Earth, and how Iran survived Macedonian armies, Arab conquest, Mongol annihilation, and colonial dismemberment, not because it was lucky, and not because it was invincible. It survived because it understood something most civilizations learned too late. Armies pass. Languages last. Identity, when it runs deep enough, is almost impossible to kill. Every conqueror who marched onto that plateau thinking they were writing the final chapter ended up becoming one of its paragraphs instead. That is what 5,000 years looks like, and the story is still being written. Kindly subscribe to Chronicles of the Past